There is a corner of the enclosure that the keepers have stopped trying to reach. Not because they gave up, because every time they approached, the monkey made herself smaller. Not aggressive, not afraid exactly, just smaller. Shoulders drawn in spine, curved forward as though she had spent a very long time practicing how to take up less space in the world. The keepers had learned to read this. They had learned that pushing past it, moving closer, offering food, attempting contact, produced nothing except a deeper withdrawal. A smaller version of the same animal, retreating further into the geometry of her own contracted body. So they had stopped trying to reach the corner. They came, they replaced the bowl, they noted what they saw, and they left. Her name was Yomo, and she had been in the semi-isolation unit for 3 weeks by the time anyone thought to try something different. The food bowl was replaced every morning. Every morning it came back untouched. At 7.1 kilograms when she arrived, and losing weight with each passing week, the veterinary team was beginning to have quiet conversations in the hallway. The kind where no one writes anything down yet, but everyone is thinking the same thing. There was nothing visibly wrong with her. No wound, no illness the instruments could name. Just a body that had somewhere along the way decided to stop participating. Monkey Mountain at this zoo was built to mimic the kind of terrain Japanese macaques have occupied for thousands of years. Layered volcanic rock, narrow ledges, shallow pools fed by a slow trickle of water along the eastern wall. 31 animals lived there, from a distance on a quiet morning. The mountain looked like the kind of place a person might want to sit for a while. The gray stone worn smooth at its edges, the occasional flash of russet fur moving between levels, the sound of water just audible beneath the ambient noise of the zoo. Up close, it was something more demanding than that. Every surface was contested. Every position on every ledge carried social meaning: who sat where, who moved for whom, who was permitted to remain when a higher-ranked animal wanted the same piece of ground. The 31 animals on that mountain had been working out these questions among themselves for years, with a thoroughness and a long memory that most observers underestimated. They had a hierarchy as precise and legible as any organizational chart, though it was written in proximity and silence rather than titles. Who groomed whom each morning, who moved aside at the water channel without being asked, whose infant was allowed to tumble into another female's lap without consequence. These things were negotiated constantly, invisibly, and with complete seriousness. Yomo had understood the system. For 3 years she had held a position near the middle of it, not dominant, not marginal, not invisible. She had built that position the way all middle-ranked females do, carefully, through alliance, through patience, through the slow accumulation of small social debts owed and repaid. A younger female she had groomed regularly now returned the favor without being asked. An older female near the top of the hierarchy had, on several occasions, allowed Yomo's infant to sit within arm's reach. A permission that meant more in macaque terms than any human equivalent. These were not small things. They were the foundation of a life within the group built piece by piece over years, and they were in their way as real and as load-bearing as anything Yomo had. Then her infant died, and the accounting changed. In the world of Japanese macaques, reproductive success is not merely personal. It is the currency through which a female's value to the group is continuously measured and remeasured. An infant represents future alliances, future grooming partners, future defenders. The infant's presence is in a sense a guarantee evidence that this female is contributing to the group's future, that the investment of alliance and proximity is not wasted on her. When the infant is gone, something shifts in how the group calculates a female's place within it. It does not happen all at once. It happens in the small things first. A grooming session that ends earlier than usual. A path to the water channel that is no longer cleared automatically. Another female's infant that is no longer allowed to sit close. Yomo noticed each of these individually, but by the time the pattern became clear, it was already too late to reverse it. The female who held the alpha position had always been efficient in the way she managed the group's social geometry, not cruel exactly, but precise and without sentimentality. One morning, she simply stood between Yomo and the water. Did not threaten, did not vocalize. Just stood there and waited for Yomo to recalculate. The group watched. No one looked away. There is no argument, no confrontation, no single moment that could be pointed to later. Just the way consensus forms without discussion, the way an animal can move from belonging to not belonging, through the steady withdrawal of 100 small permissions, each one too small to protest, each one adding to the last. Yomo tried in the way that animals try to hold what she had built, presenting herself for grooming, positioning herself near her previous allies, moving through the mountain's familiar routes as though nothing had changed. But the routes were different now. The spaces that had opened for her before remained occupied. The animals she approached turned away or moved off not aggressively, but with the quiet efficiency of a group reorganizing around new social math. In the days that followed, the pressure escalated from exclusion to something more direct. And the keepers monitoring from the upper walkway began watching with increasing frequency and then with increasing concern. There is a threshold in these situations not defined by any single event, but by an accumulation of them where intervention becomes necessary. Yomo was brought to the semi-isolation unit that same afternoon. She walked in without resistance. She found the far corner. She turned her back to the room, and she stayed there. The corner she had chosen faced away from everything. Away from the courtyard, away from the chain link, away from the patch of sky visible through the outer fence. The semi-isolation unit had been designed with care, a half wall of chain link opening onto a small inner courtyard, not a view of anything dramatic. Just a square of concrete and sky. A single weathered wooden post, a patch of ground that caught the afternoon light for about 2 hours each day. The thinking was that exposure to open air, to the ambient sounds of the larger zoo, to the ordinary passage of birds and wind, would help a stressed animal find its way back. It usually did. With Yomo, nothing changed. She continued to occupy the far corner back to the courtyard, through rain and through the rare winter sun, through the morning rounds and the evening checks, through weeks that began to blur together in the keeper logs. What was happening inside her body during this time is not difficult to understand, though it is difficult to witness. Chronic stress in primates produces a sustained elevation of cortisol, the hormone the body releases to manage threat. In small doses, cortisol is useful. It sharpens attention, mobilizes energy, prepares an animal to respond. But when the threat does not resolve, when the cortisol keeps rising with nowhere to go, the body begins to redirect its resources away from functions it has decided are no longer essential: digestion first, then immune response, and eventually in the way of a system that has been running on emergency power for too long. The hunger signal itself goes quiet, not because the animal is full, because the circuit that carries the signal has for the time being shut down. Yomo dropped to 6.3 kilograms. Her fur, still intact, had lost the particular sheen that healthy macaque coats carry. Not dirty, not matted, just dull in the way that things go dull when the energy that normally maintains them is being spent elsewhere. Her posture did not change throughout the day. The same curve of the spine, the same angle of the shoulders, the same compression of the body inward that had been her body's first response to this place and had never fully released. A keeper came to replace the food bowl one morning and crouched nearby for a moment, moving slowly, making no sound. A sparrow landed on the chain link directly in front of Yomo's face, close enough that she should have flinched or looked or registered it in some way. She did not. The reflex that makes the primate track movement, the alertness that is as natural to a macaque as breathing, the constant low-level monitoring of the environment that a healthy social animal maintains. Without thinking about it, all of it had gone somewhere Yomo had not come back from yet. The keeper stood, retrieved the untouched bowl, and walked away. That evening, Fumie Ando sat at the desk in the small office at the end of the keeper corridor and looked at the day's records. She had worked here for more than 20 years, long enough to have developed the kind of patience that this work either builds or breaks, and long enough to recognize when patience alone was not enough. She had tried everything she knew. Preferred foods arranged in patterns designed to stimulate foraging behavior, adjusted lighting to mimic the natural rhythm of outdoor conditions, familiar scents introduced near the enclosure materials that carried the texture of Yomo's previous life on the mountain. Each of these things had a logic, a basis in what she understood about stressed primates, and each of them had produced nothing. Fumi Ando was 51 years old and had been at this zoo since her late 20s, long enough that certain things had become habitual. In a way, she no longer questioned the particular route she walked each morning, the way she crouched rather than bent when she needed to get low. The single cup of tea she made before beginning the day's work, holding it with both hands in the cold months without thinking about it. She had no family at home. She had the zoo, and she had the accumulation of 22 years of animals she had helped and animals she had not been able to help, carried quietly in the way that people carry things they do not discuss. There had been a Sika deer years ago that had presented with a similar kind of withdrawal after a difficult birth, and she had sat outside its stall for 4 consecutive evenings, reading aloud from a magazine. Not because she believed it would help, but because she had run out of other things to try, and the silence felt like giving up. The deer had recovered eventually, though she had never been certain she had anything to do with it. She thought about that deer sometimes, in the way you think about things that didn't teach you what you hoped they would. Under the desk, her Shiba Inu Mugi shifted his weight and resettled his chin against her foot. He had been coming to the zoo with her for years, sleeping in the corner during long shifts, waiting in the office. When she made her rounds familiar enough with the smells of this place that he had long since stopped reacting to any of them. She looked at him for a while. Then she looked toward the far end of the building, in the direction of the semi-isolation unit. She was not sure it was a good idea. But she had run out of other ideas. She did not bring Mugi to Yomo directly. That was not how it worked, and Ando knew better than to rush a process that depended entirely on not rushing. She had seen what happened when you moved too fast with an animal that had gone this far inward. The flinch, the deeper retreat, the way trust once fractured in that particular direction became even harder to approach again. So she started with something that asked nothing of Yomo at all. The first thing she introduced was only a cloth, a piece of fabric that had been in Mugi's bed, carrying his scent without carrying his presence. She folded it, once placed it near the outer edge of the enclosure one morning, before Yomo was usually active, then stepped back and watched from a distance. The scent of a dog was not unfamiliar to animals that lived in a zoo. There were dogs in other parts of the building. Maintenance workers who came with animals at home, the accumulated olfactory history of a place that had housed many things over many years. But this was different. This was close and specific and present in a way that demanded some kind of response. Yomo did not move toward it, but something in her posture shifted the faintest tightening in the shoulders, a response to something new in the air, and then a long stillness that was different from the stillness of the past weeks. The previous stillness had been absence. This was attention. Small, maybe involuntary, maybe nothing at all. But Ando had been doing this long enough to know the difference between an animal that was gone and an animal that was still somewhere inside itself. And this felt very tentatively like the second thing. She left the cloth where it was and came back the next morning. It had been moved not far, just to the side, in the way that objects get moved when something investigates them during the night, without fully committing to investigation. She replaced it with a fresh one and said nothing to anyone. Over the following days, she allowed Mugi to rest in the inner courtyard, far enough from the chain link that Yomo could see him without feeling approached close enough that the sight of him was unmistakable. Mugi did what Mugi always did when given a place to rest. He turned once, lowered himself to the ground, tucked his chin between his front paws, and went to sleep. He did not look at Yomo. He did not investigate the enclosure. He simply occupied his small square of courtyard the way he occupied every resting place, completely without apology, without any apparent awareness that something significant might be expected of him. Yomo from her corner watched. Her back was still toward the courtyard. It had been toward the courtyard for weeks, but her head had turned just enough that one eye could track the shape of the dog across the open ground. Ando noticed the head turn from the far side of the courtyard and did not move for a long time. In the days that followed, she brought Mugi closer. A little more each time, always slowly, always with the same unhurried routine. The walk across the courtyard, the lowering of his body to the ground, the tuck of the chin, the closing of the eyes. Yomo watched each arrival. She did not come to the chain link, but she did not turn away either. One afternoon, Mugi shifted in his sleep, and his paw scraped lightly across the concrete, a small sound barely audible. The kind of sound that would not register in any ordinary context. Yomo's shoulders pulled in the automatic compression that had been her body's first response to any unexpected sound since she arrived here, and then after a moment, slowly released. She looked at the dog. Mugi did not open his eyes. He breathed. The shoulders came down, and for the first time since she had entered this enclosure, Yomo did not make herself smaller. She simply sat at her ordinary size and watched a dog sleep in the afternoon light. Ando, standing at the far edge of the courtyard where she had been watching without moving, did not go in. Several mornings later, she arrived to find that the food bowl was not entirely full. She stood looking at it for a moment before she picked it up. There was not much missing. Just the impression of teeth at the edge of the softer pieces. The faint evidence of a decision made sometime in the night quietly and without witness. She carried the bowl to the sink, washed it, set it to dry, filled it again, and placed it back. She did not say anything to anyone until later that afternoon, and even then she mentioned it briefly. And moved on, the way you move on from things you do not yet want to examine too closely, in case examining them makes them fragile. Something had shifted and she knew it, and she did not want to look at it directly yet. The next time Mugi came to the courtyard, Yomo was already at the chain link when they arrived. She had crossed the floor of the enclosure without hurry, without drama. Just moved in the way she used to move before all of this, with the quiet assurance of an animal going somewhere. She had decided to go as though the distance between her corner and the fence were no distance at all. She sat down on her side of the chain link. Mugi lowered himself to the ground nearby. They looked at each other for a moment. The monkey and the dog, in the fading afternoon light, with the chain link between them, and the quiet of the empty courtyard around them. Then Mugi put his head back down. Yomo reached one hand through the gap in the chain link slowly. In the way you reach towards something you are not certain will still be there when you arrive, and touched the fur along his side. Her hand did not shake. What followed was deliberate and unhurried. She parted the fur in small sections, moved through it methodically, her entire attention absorbed in the task, the way a macaque's attention always is when it grooms completely without distraction, as though nothing else in the world currently exists. Among macaques, grooming is not casual. It is offered only to those a female has chosen, and Yomo had not offered it to any living thing since before she was brought here. Mugi exhaled a long, slow breath that moved through his whole body and did not move. Ando had come to check on the evening feeding and stood where she was at the far edge of the courtyard. She did not move and did not speak because there was nothing to do here except witness it, and she had enough experience to know that witnessing was sometimes the most important thing a person could offer. After a while, Mugi raised his head and licked Yomo's hand once briefly, with the matter-of-fact warmth that was characteristic of everything he did, and then settled back down. Yomo kept grooming. The courtyard light faded, the last of the sun retreating up the far wall, and then disappearing entirely, leaving the space in the cool, even gray of early evening. Neither of them moved. Later, walking back through the keeper corridor with the day's last checks complete, Ando stopped at the door of the building and stood for a moment in the cold air. There is a kind of knowledge that comes from 20 years of work with animals, an understanding of timing, of distance of the signals that mean an animal is ready, and the signals that mean it is not, of what to offer and when to withdraw it. And she had used all of it in the past weeks, and it had not been enough. What had been enough was a dog who did not know any of it, who had simply lain down in the available light and gone to sleep and kept showing up and asked for nothing. She thought about this for a while. Then she turned off the corridor light and went home. The courtyard was empty behind her. The wooden post stood where it always stood. The chain link held its shape in the dark. In the weeks that followed, Yomo's weight began to return. Slowly at first, and then with more consistency, the numbers climbed back toward where they had been when she arrived. Her fur recovered its sheen not all at once, but in the gradual way of a body that has decided, for whatever reason, to start maintaining itself again. She began grooming herself again, the long, methodical attention to her own coat that primates in good health perform almost unconsciously, the kind of self-care that disappears first under severe stress and returns last, a signal as reliable as any the instruments could provide. She began sitting differently too. Not the compressed inward curve of the past weeks, but with her weight distributed the way a relaxed animal sits, occupying the space she was in, rather than contracting away from it. One afternoon, a keeper crossed the courtyard carrying a bucket, and Yomo looked up. Just for a moment, a flicker of attention tracking the movement, the ordinary alertness of a healthy animal noting something passing through its world. Then she looked away. The keeper did not react. But later, describing it to Ando, she said it was the first time she had felt looked at by that animal, rather than looked through. A plan for gradual reintroduction to the troop began carefully with no certainty about its outcome. Because social reintegration in macaque groups is a process that cannot be forced or predicted, only attempted. The structure of the troop had continued without Yomo. The positions had been adjusted, the alliances recalculated, the daily negotiations carried on in the way they always did, with the steady efficiency of animals for whom social order is not a convenience, but a survival mechanism. She would have to find her way back into it slowly, if she could find her way back at all. She would have to rebuild piece by piece the 100 small permissions that add up to belonging, the grooming offered and accepted, the distances negotiated, the slow reestablishment of a presence that the group had in her absence redistributed itself around. It would take time and patience and a willingness to begin again at the lowest possible position and work upward from there. No one promised that she would. The mountain would not be easy. It had never been easy for anyone. But every afternoon, Yomo moved to the side of the enclosure that faced the courtyard. She sat at the chain link. She waited. Even on the days Mugi did not come, she waited. She watched the square of concrete where he usually lay, the patch of afternoon light that moved across it in a slow diagonal. As the day progressed, the wooden post at the courtyard's edge that had become in some way, she could not have named a landmark. There is no clean explanation for what happened in those weeks. No single mechanism that accounts for why a dog sleeping in a courtyard could reach something that experience and expertise and genuine care had not. Animals in distress often cannot receive attention that is directed at them. The focus of a trained caregiver, however gentle, arrives with intention, with the shape of a goal. A hoped-for outcome, a need for the animal to be different than it currently is. Even the most careful approach carries within it a kind of pressure. The pressure of being seen as something that needs fixing, something that has not yet arrived at where it is supposed to be. Mugi had none of that. He came to the courtyard because he was brought there, and he slept because he was tired, and he lay still when he was touched, because that was simply his nature. He did not need Yomo to get better. He did not need her to be anything at all. And perhaps that the radical absence of requirement was the only thing that could have made its way through. Perhaps what she needed after everything the troop had done, and the infant had cost her, and the long weeks in the corner had taken from her, was not to be helped towards something, just to be joined where she was. In the mornings now, when Ando came to begin her rounds, she sometimes paused at the window that looked into the semi-isolation courtyard before unlocking the first door. The corner where Yomo had spent those weeks was empty. She was always somewhere else in the enclosure, at the food bowl, at the water, sitting near the chain link, with her face turned toward the courtyard, waiting for the particular sound of a dog's paws on concrete. The corner stood empty in the early light. The food bowl had been touched. Ando stood at the window for a moment, long enough to take it in, and then continued with her rounds. No one knows exactly what shifted in her that afternoon. What particular arrangement of warmth and stillness and the smell of something living finally made its way through to wherever she had gone. Only that someone had lain down, without asking anything, without needing her to be different or better or more than she was. Just there, breathing slowly in the available light. And for Yomo, it turned out, that was enough.